I stumbled upon the secret to immortality. I deeply regret it. I was wrapping up pre-med undergrad, and I had just gotten into my med school of choice. I decided I was going to pay lip service to the rest of my coursework in the semester and start summer break a bit early. I was more or less a legacy, and though the threat of them rescinding my admission was present on paper, in reality, no one would do anything about it. Med school was a hump to get over, and the rest of the life was a coast downhill. I was pretty much a shoo-in at my uncle's pill mill clinic in Florida. I've been around enough pre-med to know that there are two kinds of med students. The ones who really want to be a doctor to help people or be at the edge of cutting-edge medical science, while others look at medicine as a route to a six-figure income, along a path of least resistance. I definitely fell on the latter. I grew up pretty oblivious to the cost of healthcare, not only because I took health insurance for granted, but I was also in good health. I just saw healthcare as an easy way to make money off people who had no choice but to pay whatever we wanted to charge them because America. It was wrapped into the way my family thought about medicine, among other things. While my more conscientious classmates finished their semester and prepped for a summer of volunteer work to pad their experience and resumes, I decided that it was the last best chance to take up my favorite podcaster's suggestion and basically go out and do a bunch of recreational drugs under the guise of a cultural experience. I was traveling around Latin America with two of my pre-med frat bros, Rodney and Mark. Rodney was American as apple pie, and Mark was actually from Europe. We spent our free time trolling a lot of our fellow pre-med students who rallied for universal healthcare by pointing out the fact they might as well be burning their own paychecks. Mark knew this better than most since he lived in a system of government healthcare and moved here so he could make more money setting up an elective surgery practice. We were visiting all the fun hotspots, pretty much anything that popped up on the psychedelic or psychoactive boards, Arrowid, Joe Rogan, hippy-dippy stuff. I had this funny way of justifying it all. How could I be a good doctor if I don't know this stuff? I don't know. It was all BS, honestly. It was all about me and time and place and being young and being affluent. I happen to believe that you're familiar with that story. The whole stereotypical ayahuasca experience offered by natives and the descendants of natives in Peru. It's a bunch of dudes like me in a hut with thick tea, smoke, and jokes, egging on the shamans to give us a shotgun wedding with DMT. If you pay enough, you can get them to roll their eyes and give you the basic instructions of making sure your ass is above your head when you start vomiting. Then it's all about melting away into ego death and touching time and hearing space. At some point, I must have made a mistake and got into the wrong retreat, made a wrong turn, and accidentally got separated from my friends because that's not quite what I experienced. Maybe I mistranslated something. Maybe something else went wrong, but my experience was very different and highly ritualistic. I was led deep into the retreat site, around a more secluded hut with very old and very sick-looking individuals. Some of them were elder leaders of various militaries and political parties from Cuba, China, and Venezuela. At least one of them was definitely from North Korea. The shaman was mostly naked, with only a black loincloth over his junk. His limbs and facial bone contours were outlined by a white chalky substance. He bore a vague resemblance to the Grim Reaper. The hut did not have a vomit canal as I was led to expect, and inside was actually a fairly large fire. The shaman kept repeating one word again and again, and I wasn't sure what it was, what exactly it translated to. He then poured some kind of seeds into the fire. Their shells turned the fire green, and they popped like popcorn. A dense white smoke poured into the tent and nearly extinguished the flame. One sniff of the bitter vapors, and I was gone. I had been warned and prepared for a DMT experience. I had already done magic mushrooms and LSD. I was more or less familiar with this class of serotonergic substance. The mysticism was all but lost on me going into this adventure. The low-level ego hedging and mental expansion was a side effect, not a goal. I honestly just wanted to get wasted and have fun doing it. In any case, what I experienced was far from what I had expected. I knew something was wrong when I saw all my skin melt off, and I became a skeleton. I was hoping for machine elves or aliens or some transcendent non-corporeal communication, but this was like dousing myself with a flaming jug of nightmare fuel. After a few flashes of disorganized terror, I started to have extremely vivid third-person views of myself as something entirely mechanical and electronic. The flesh and blood, brain and bone replaced with my crude recollection of what came scattering out of my smartphone when I dropped it one time. I was made of high-density plastic and touchscreen material. I had a loose understanding of microchips and circuit boards. In my head was an Escher-style churning collection of gold, green, and black bars with spindly spider-like qualities warping around inside my head. My bones were plastic. Good job, imagination. My heart appeared as a thin lithium-ion battery. My muscles and joints were a bunch of magnets zapping together back and forth. My eyes were glassy flat scanners. As I watched myself become amazed with myself, my eye sockets swallowed my eyes, and I saw everything go dark. I felt this strange sensation as my body felt compressed. I was being swallowed by myself. It was maroon and dark, with the odd bubble rising as I descended into myself. I felt an eerie stillness as I sank into a chamber of soft glowing light. I saw my thin battery of a heart throb and echo with each beat in super slow motion. It was hanging there attached to thin wires which pumped little glowing electrons back and forth. I floated around from the front all the way spinning underneath. There's where I saw it. I saw a little thin crack in the surface of my battery heart. It was ever so slightly leaking a thin mist of gold fluid into the empty chamber. The mist flew off, disappearing in the ether like the sands of time. I was tempted to fly in and see if I could patch the hole. I had strong instincts at that moment, thinking that this was somehow a manifestation of my time on this earth being limited, counting down, my battery running out. The more I let go, the closer to the hole and the mist I flew, and slowly, without my hands, the leak turned off and stopped altogether. Then, like shrink wrap, the little crinkled hole flattened and covered itself. I was suddenly warped to this pixelated, zoomed-in view that consumed my entire vision. I watched as slowly, pixel by pixel, my vision turned from gold to soft white. As the last few hundred were about to turn, the gentle vibrations of my body lurched faster and became violent. My vision of my vision pulsed in and out. As everything began to fade away, a powerful voice came out of nowhere. And I mean nowhere. It was a voice that echoed through the universe, making every galaxy, every sun, every planet, moon, and comet tremble. It was the voice of the void, the voice of inevitability. It rattled me as if I were speaking to the personification of an earthquake, tidal wave, or forest fire. After the initial jarring presentation, I became somewhat relieved, and finally the other presence I had come to expect on this trip appeared. As the words the voice spoke to me started to register, I became less startled, less settled, less complacent, less prepared. It told me that I had found the little timer, the little clock my people had inside of us. It was the charge meter on my life, and it was ticking down. But this ritual could set it back a few hours, a few days, a few years. If I were lucky, I could reset the timer on my life by a decade. But some people had a defect, and it was an all-or-nothing fix. And then I flashed to a space of icy, suffocating blackness. I felt myself get pulled, ripped apart, every finger, every limb, every hair, every eyelash, every skin flake and cell loosened and then vacuumed away into nothing. I was a bubble, and I burst into a mist and then vapor. until I became the black on black and I lost any sense of up, down, night, and day. My brain wasn't there, but my consciousness flared into a sinking, gasping panic that I felt like it would last forever. And then my vision flashed again, and I came back to the last few pixels patching up the leaking of my heart. The voice asked me what I wanted, and I pled to live. It asked me all or nothing. Without hesitation, I said, all of it. All of it, all of it, all of it. And then the last pixels turned from gold to a shimmering white, and my vision quaked back to the chamber with my battery heart. It glowed gold over the white, and there was no longer a leak. And then I got jolted back to the hut. It was still filled with bitter smoke, and I started immediately to cough. I could barely see the other persons inside. The man sitting across from me looked relieved, and he slowly crawled out of the tent. It was then I noticed something heavy leaning on me. I groggily turned my head and saw the elderly Cuban man slouching over, dead, on me. I pushed his corpse aside with the help of the shaman. My hand brushed against his as I tried to crawl out of the hut, and out from under the perished man, clad in the hammer and sickle. The shaman recoiled on contact with me, and he gave me a pained expression. As I slowly gathered myself and coughed out the rest of the smoke, I noticed that the rest of the hut was on fire and burning down with the dead men inside. I say men because out of the 6 persons, not including the shaman, only 3, including myself, exited. My head felt remarkably clear for having such an intense experience, and yet I knew I wasn't fully recovered. When I heard that same chant all around me that was being chanted as I entered. When I heard it the same way going in, my head was translating it into a juxtaposition of celebratory warning and cautious congratulations. While my elderly compatriots suddenly looked as if they were 5 to 10 years younger in composition, I felt and looked about the same as I did when I was directed back to the more public and tourist areas of this particular retreat. I reached a post-experience gathering point where I found my 2 friends. It became very clear to me that I definitely had stumbled into some different kind of retreat than the standard ayahuasca experience. I was a little numb to my surroundings, and as my group started laughing at me as I stumbled back to the refreshments, they handed me water with some sort of supplement, as they all looked still really tweaked. They cracked big rosy smiles and hearty laughs like they had all won the lottery, and then some. They asked me where I ended up, and I asked them back, like tripwise or what? They asked me which hut I was in, and it was then that I pointed towards the pathway I got lost on and found it now blocked by thick forest foliage. They made fun of me for pointing out that we had to catch the train to Colombia for the next part of our chemical escapades. We barely made it to the train, and after taking our seats in our private car, we passed out for the entirety of the journey. We were so put out that the conductor had to personally wake us and escort us off the train at our next stop. It was morning by then, and to fulfill the apparent lifelong dream of one of my traveling buddies and future lawyer, Rodney, we successfully tracked down one of the famed off-book cocaine bars. He had talked about this the entire trip. Once we entered Colombia, he was on the whiskey trail, or some sort of craft beer crusade. He was detailed about the subtle differences between sulfate compound served in Colombia versus the hydrochloride salt preferred by North Americans and Europeans. Rodney regaled us with the fact that we could try real Coca-Cola with the cocoa leaves infused into the formula at this bar. He went into the variations of the coca plant in the east part of the country versus the west, and the manufacturing techniques as if we were comparing barrel-aged stouts or 20-year-old scotches. It was the same to me as long as it did the job, which, to be honest, was just to reinforce the young and dumb and carelessness that I was already all about. In the midst of a coke binge, my traveling buddies recounted their experience at the Peruvian retreat. As I'd already realized, I apparently gotten lost and entered some other kind of psychedelic ritual, and before I could finish my story and recount the fact that 3 persons died, and then they were burned away. Mark, my other friend, the one who just cannot handle his blow, started sputtering out how I was worthless and dumb. Every other word out of his mouth was worthless. Worthless, worthless, worthless. Rodney, with his head cocked up towards the glistening sun, which streamed in through the crack in the window frame, ground his teeth and sniffled ever so slightly, joined the chant of worthless. I was getting pissed, and the proprietors seemed alarmed by our loudness and our English, which seemed like a dead giveaway. With a large handgun strapped to their waist, one of them came over to our table and removed the booger sugar and poured us shots of an oily, yellowish liquor from a bottle filled with both a snake and a scorpion. He commanded us to drink it and pay. Not wanting any trouble, I paid immediately. With the source of our intoxication well concealed, they let us alone, and Mark and Rodney's chant resumed. I was pissed, since most of the cocaine left was mine, and the venom liquor left much to be desired. I was left retching while they continued to snicker at me. During the laugh out loud session, they decided to get up and start their search for weed and then breakfast. I told them that I would catch up with them after I found some place to either pee or throw up. I really wasn't sure which I was going to do. I swung around to the back part of the bar, and a very attractive woman who looked vaguely American and spoke good English sat alone. She offered me a line out of some sense of righting the unfairness of having mine taken away because my friends were obnoxious. I accepted the line, and the moment I felt the graininess hit my nostril, I was out. I was never supposed to get back up. I was going to be a tourist crime statistic. I was going to be vanished. I was going to be the mourned. When I came to, it was sometime the next morning. I believed I was out about a day. I woke up and started to pat myself down, and found myself liberated of my phone, wallet, and watch. The thieves even took my belt, and from the onset I believed they took the contact lenses out of my eyes. I felt numb and discombobulated, like a kid who emerged from the dentist office after getting their first cavities filled. My mind flashed to something I remembered from a Vice documentary about scopolamine-wielding thieves. Scopolamine was a drug that, due to daze and suggestibility, had made robbery quite easy. I blinked a bunch and I still could barely see. I felt like I was in a ditch somewhere outside the village. It's the best that I could make out from what little I could see. I got up, and I was barely able to stand. I felt very light, and if I squinted, I could see my shirt was ripped and felt wet. As I twisted and tried to balance myself, I saw some kids running around with a soccer ball coming towards me. I tried to flag them down with my so-so broken Spanish, but I mostly squeaked. I saw the blur of their bodies stop, and their heads lift up towards me. Then they let go a shrill scream, and all but one of them ran for their lives. The last one stood trembling as I tried to get closer to talk to him. It was then I realized that I was having a chronically difficult time speaking, and I went to pound my chest to get the phlegm out of it from the past week's worth of chemical abuse. As my fist went in for the first strike, I felt it sink into something warm and wet. I immediately looked down, and in the blur of my vision, I saw my own hand covered in crusty blood and sunk part way into my chest cavity. I realized that I could barely speak because I was missing a lung. I was missing a heart, my liver, both my kidneys. I realized I could barely see, not just because my contact lenses were removed, but whoever it was took my corneas as well. My mind flashed back to the experience in the hut 2 days ago, when I figured out that somehow my life, my existence, was preserved and projected from that plane of existence. And now I was immortal, hollowed out, and even though I was panicked, I knew I was butchered for an illegal organ trade, and yet I was still alive. The boy walked over to me and took my hand and walked me to his home. He spoke to me in slow Spanish with a child's vocabulary, so I could understand as best as I could. He called me the same native word that they chanted in the hut that night, the word that meant cautious congratulations. It also apparently meant some kind of boogeyman to the child. He told me that the same people who did this to me did it to his father, and that he could show me where they work, so I could scare them away. I had no phone. I had no money. I had no idea. I had no idea where my friends were at this point. Maybe they were out looking for me. Maybe they were groaning and collapsed from the coke binge. No one was going to help me, except for this kid. So in the cover of a rainstorm, and with the help of a bedsheet, he guided me through the town to a chicken processing plant, where an AK-47 wielding guard stood outside. I told him to go hide as I approached the door. The guard ordered me to stop, but I kept coming. And when he emptied his magazine, I still kept going, like the Terminator. He fled in terror as I disrobed and revealed my chest cavity, my bullet-shattered rib cage, a nearly slouching appearance from some additional damage the rifle left me, in an uneven gait as I tried to keep my arm and my torso upright. The guard cried out, "Policia! Policia!" which was no doubt the signal to flee the site of their illegal activity, and with that he dropped the rifle and fled himself. I entered the facility through the guarded door and smelled rot. Spotted slick blood, pooled up on partially rusted metal tables. I spotted one person that somehow I had this immediate sense that I had met him before. He was rushing out towards me with 2 blood-smeared sandwich coolers in hand, and one tucked under his arm. He saw me, and he gasped before turning too rapidly to maintain traction on the bloody slick floor. Something in my gut, or should I say nearly lack of guts, told me that this was the man who extracted all of my organs during my scopolamine-induced stupor. There was no reason for me to think this, to be honest. Thinking about it now, scopolamine was a near-perfect drug, perhaps along with ketamine and some opiates, to accomplish the task of extracting organs from the freshest living or barely living subjects. And in the event they were to survive, there would be no memory of it. I was so fixated on watching this man shake in pure, utter terror that I didn't notice the boy who helped me find the facility came through the doorway, was now pointing the gun, bayonet at all, at the surgeon. This is where I lost it. This is where I got really weird with it. This is where I decided to do him what he did to me. I let the boy poke him with the bayonet a few times until he agreed to lead us to his operating table. The boy forced him up on the table as he panicked with wide eyes. Around the makeshift operating room, I found dirty syringes loaded with various paralytic agents that I was too eager to poke him with. As he lost muscle control, he did not lose consciousness. I wondered how easy it would be to try to do surgery on myself, to try to piece myself back together. I decided to start with how I believed he started with me, with the corneas. In my still blurry state, I grabbed what essentially was a glorified X-Acto knife and started to jab at the surgeon's eyes. My incision was jagged, and he screamed with labored breath as the paralytic started to freeze his diaphragm. Knowing this, yes, I decided to abandon my efforts with his eye and took out a larger piece of cutlery and went to work on his abdomen. I watched his final winces and pained squawks as I pulled out and unraveled his small intestines in front of him, like a string of Christmas tree lights. I think I let this whole thing just sit for a day. I was in immense pain and an immense shock constantly. I'll admit that if I needed to eat, if I was physically capable of ingesting and digesting food, I would not have wanted to. Then I went to work on the bits and pieces in the cooler and the fridges all around me. I decided I should not let these go to waste, and between my limited starter medical knowledge, the boy, and the internet, I was able to successfully patch myself up. I took some time and a theft, but I eventually made myself at least externally normal, and the corneas I found seemed to take okay on my own eyes for now. With the transplant successful, I tracked down the rest of the surgeons who managed to flee the organ harvesting plant. I was able to see the extent of their organ trafficking network within the course of a few days. I was even able to identify the woman who drugged me at the cocaine bar. I had forgotten everything else. Revenge was the only thing on my mind. I did my best to keep myself patched up from encounter to encounter, even if it occasionally helped to unstitch myself and pull out an organ or two. I didn't need them, except to pass while in public. I felt like I was the king of the world. I felt like I was doing more in eradicating this type of crime in 2 weeks than could be accomplished normally in 2 years. I felt like I was doing more for humanitarian efforts than all of the overachievers headed to their missions for summer semester. I was in perfect control of my new gift. Anyways, I discovered the woman apparently fled back to the United States. As I finished mopping up the organization in Colombia, I figured out a way to stow away on a cargo plane back to the US. I promised the boy early in our escapades that I would smuggle him into the United States as well. But during the flight, a malfunction in his oxygen mask led him to his asphyxiation in the cargo bay of the flight. He was the last person I think I actually cared about, and even now I kinda miss him. I regret not knowing his name. I literally just called him Nino the entire time I knew him. Anyway, Nino's body helped me evade airport security when he fell out of the landing gear. I was able to sneak across multiple runways and out of the secured area without being detected. I unfortunately had to let his organs go to waste. Shortly after landing, I found myself in a bad state. Immortal I was, the spare parts and stitches holding my non-original body parts together were not. I started needing to continually swap out parts of myself as other organs rotted or were rejected by parts of the rest of my body, or somebody else's body. I was too late on tracking down the woman. Apparently her buyers got after her before I could. They burned her, so there wasn't anything left for me to harvest. This was a shame, as I figured that she was my last chance to maybe find my original organs and restore all of my original body. With a lot of time and better medical facilities to break into, as well as an off-book supply of anti-rejection transplant serums, I was eventually able to keep my body and most of its functionality fairly normal for a while. I could look into the mirror and almost see myself again. For a time I could eat and drink without worrying about whether I'd have to manually digest it. At this point, at least a month passed, and with the exception of my mother, my world had moved on without me. I thought about returning to my old life, but there was really nothing there left for me. I think the most interaction I had with my old life at that point was I sent a flyer to Rodney and Mark at the prices my organs might fetch on the black market. $62K for a kidney, about $100K for the liver, $150K for my heart, and yet only about $30K for the corneas, in case you're wondering. On the back of the flyer, I wrote in blood, "Worthless?" with a question mark. I was still a stupid kid, and with the right treatment and occasional transplant, I was looking good. So I decided to audit medical school as best as I could. And then the pandemic hit, and everyone fled to their homes and off campus, and I was more or less hanging out on an empty med school campus. I had nowhere else to go. It was bad timing, too, since I was letting myself go a bit just before. I needed some spare parts, but I vowed I wouldn't go harvesting them and try to make do with stealing more and more medication. After all, I could suppress the remnants of my immune system as much as I like, since my life no longer depended upon my immune system. Still, no matter how much balance I tried to achieve with medication, how much figurative medical duct tape I put on myself, I would eventually need new organs again to keep myself normal-ish. Now, about 6 months into the plague, I'm pretty well reduced to shambles. I can barely stand up and walk straight. Where I can still feel, I feel immense pain. I dare not come out in the daylight. I am immortal, but I am not invulnerable, and the last thing I want is to be captured and dissected for medical research, or shot to hell again. So I shuffle around in the dark, searching for, well, let's just say, I no longer plan on spending eternity like this. I have already spent an eternity like this. According to my research on the ritual I accidentally participated in, it is not reversible. It is a miracle I was able to access that plane of existence to have any kind of life-prolonging effect, much less rig my own immortality. I don't understand it myself, but the way I think of it, the fourth dimension of my body is now disconnected from the other three, and their outcomes. They won't age by themselves, but they can be manipulated by my consciousness, and my consciousness will never fade. I will survive long after the day until the sun burns out and expands to engulf the planet. I will be lucky to maintain my corporal being until then. My consciousness, no matter what conditions some part of my vaporized body will exist in, will persist until the day the universe extinguishes all energy transaction and time itself stops. That's a very long time. It's a long time to look after a body that still largely follows the laws of biology. I suppose so long as some part of my physical body can be grafted to another, I can entirely change me. I could become a human jigsaw puzzle, or the quintessential ship of Thesis. But for now, I am fine with writing this in the abandoned computer room of your local high school, shambling through the dining rooms of your COVID-shuttered restaurant, walk-in fridge, lurking around your town looking for people who might be forgettable, who might have traits compatible with my own. So if you catch a glimpse of me in the flickering fluorescent lights as you come back into your school or business when the pandemic is over, if you see me shambling under the glare of a street lamp at night, if you see my sagging, flailing body, just mind your own business. I'm just like you. If you try to shoot me or come after me, I'll just need more of you to make me whole again. There must be others like me as well. Perhaps someone you know. Perhaps someone who's old-worldly at heart or prefers the company of old things. Perhaps they spend their life working in museums or antique malls, searching for that special someone. Just bad enough, or maybe just young enough to make them whole again. I'll take who I can get. Soon enough, I might find someone to make me whole again. Consider this your cautious congratulations.